So this deliberate silence that we just tend to have has enabled Arab Muslims, particularly in America, to promote Islam as some kind of slave-free alternative to Christianity. But whatever your choice of religion is, the facts show that Islam, white Christians and white Jews, all sold blacks into slavery. The Christians bought us, the Arabs in Islam bought us too. This was all foretold in the Bible in Deuteronomy 28, verses 15 to 68. The Hebrew Israelites are clearly not white Europeans or the Arabs who sold slaves. The Bible doesn't support this. While the Europeans targeted men in West Africa, the Arab slave trade targeted women in East Africa and Central Africa to serve as domestic slaves, wet nannies, and sex slaves in their infamous harems. And the eunuchs lived in the palaces of the Arab sheiks. This trade trickled over millennia, was estimated to have taken more than 10 million Africans via the Swahili coast to India, Saudi Arabia, China, and Turkey, also via the trans-Saharan route to North Africa, Spain, and Portugal. Here we see here is a picture of Zanzibar slaves from East Africa, Tanzania, Kenya, 1850s, taken by Arab men. Some of the Arabs, of course, are black men. You'll see some Arabs in the Middle East that are dark-skinned too as well, because they have a mixture of black Semitic and black Hamitic blood. All these men already on the boat that you see here are already castrated or will be castrated before they get put into their appropriate homes or palaces. This Arab slave ship was the Dhow, and the Dhow was a generic name for the number of traditional sailing vessels with one or more masts with latent sails used in the Red Sea and Indian Ocean region to transport black slaves. Historians are divided as to whether the Dhow was invented by Arabs or Indians. Typically sporting long, thin hulls, the Dhows are trading vessels primarily used to carry heavy items like fruit, freshwater, merchandise along the coast of the Arabian Peninsula, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and East Africa. Different Arabic historians have quoted, one quote was, all African women are prostitutes, and the whole race of African men are abid, or abid, which is an Arabic term which means slave stock. The word black and slave are synonymous with each other in the Arabic language. Also, another quote was that the equator is inhabited by communities of blacks who may be numbered among the savage beasts. Their complexion and hair are burnt, and they are physically and morally abnormal. Their brains almost boil from the sun's heat. These are two Arab men that talked about what they felt about black people. Arab slave traders taking slaves. You see here these numerous pictures. Black people are being used as servants and slaves, sex slaves. Right here, you see this picture right here. And in America, with the slavery, Jews, transatlantic slave trade, we see that we were wet nannies for the white babies, being breastfed by black women that had their own children. Their milk was going to the white children, and they were raising the white babies, taking care of them almost probably better than they were taking care of their own black babies. You see here more pictures. This happened during slavery, and it still happened after slavery, when a lot of blacks were house servants and caregivers and nannies in New York and other areas to rich Jewish families or Italian families. You take care of their family and their children, their household better than we took care of our own household. So while their children were going to school, private schools, getting good education, getting good nutrition, and being in safe environments, the children of the black people that were working for these white people were in the streets, dying of violence and cocaine and heroin and everything else under the sun. Biracial slave children, as you can see here, the pictures, they're still considered slaves. Now they wrote books about what they believe was going to happen when they integrated blacks and freed slaves. That term is called miscegenation or integration. Miscegenation is the act of mixing or the state of being mixed. They believe this is what would happen to white America if they integrated blacks and they freed blacks. They feared this, and they knew it would happen. Since then, African Americans and Africans have run amok with interracial dating. But we don't have a problem with it. The problem is that they have the problem with it. They just may not say it to us blatantly in our face. The Arab men, however, avoided this by castrating their black male slaves. They did not want their women having anything to do with black men. They also, along with other races, promoted marrying within their race. This is the reason why a black African Muslim, like I said before, will have a hard time marrying an Arab Muslim woman. It's also a known fact that the white slave masters' wives and sometimes the women in these houses would also dibble-dabble and sneak and have sex with the African male slaves and have relationships. This was not promoted and supported, however they still did this. So what's interesting is that they've done different polls and studies on the percent of people that agree that it's all right for blacks and whites to date each other based on the year. And because, you know, back in the 60s and way early on, people, you know, slavery is still fresh in people's minds because, you know, a lot of people's parents were still, you know, had been victims of Jim Crow and slavery. So if you see here that people that are born after 1977, 91% of people agree with interracial dating. If you were born between 1965 and 1976, that number drops down to 85% of people that agree with interracial dating. People born between 1946 and 1964, 77% agreed it was okay. And if you're skipping all the way down to 1927, people was born in 1927 or earlier, they were like, half of them were like, no, I don't agree with it, but then the other half was saying, yeah, I agree with it. So it also depends that over time we have become more acceptable to interracial dating. So I guess we're forgetting or forgiving white America for all the atrocities they have done to us in the slave trades, and maybe even forgive them for how they treat blacks in America, even though they still treat blacks in America poorly to this day, and they don't respect us. They also noted that interracial dating may also have something to do with the races. As I talked about before on the previous DVD in my book, every other race has a tendency to intermarry with their own race. And so what I mean by this is that the Asians over here in America normally marry Asians. If they don't, they marry a white man, or they marry maybe an Indian man. But typically, if they're Asian, they marry outside their race, the first choice is a Caucasian man. Indians, people from Pakistan, Afghanistan, when they're over here in America, they normally marry the same race and the same religion. People from Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, Egypt and Palestine, Lebanon, these Arab countries, when they come over here to America, they typically marry within their race. When Jews are over here in America, whether they're born in Israel or born in America, the Jews typically marry Jews, and they promote the Judaism religion. This is a known fact. So as you see with the education also, it also has to do with money too and finances. Asians and Asians both have the highest education based on percent. College educated, bride and groom. Asian and white, college educated, bride and grooms, 47%. White and Asian, 39%. White and white, 23%. White and Hispanic is 20%. White and black is 20.5%. We're talking about white husband and black wife. Now we talk about Hispanic husband and white wife, the number drops to 16%. When we talk about black husband and white wife, in terms of education, college educated, number drops down to 12.5%. When you talk about black on black, black husband, black wife, the percent of people that are both educated in the household is 10%, and Hispanics is even lower. This is a reflection of who owns businesses, who's in jail. But as we can see, blacks, we don't have a problem with it because we are more likely to interracially date other races than other races, like I just talked about. The Asians marry Asians, the Muslims marry Muslims, Middle Easterns typically marry Middle Easterns, Jews typically marry Jews, and Indians, Pakistanis, and Afghanistans, they typically marry within their own race. But blacks, we don't do that. We kind of are just like the ancient Israelites, where God told us not to intermarry with the Canaanites, but we still did. Because Judah's first wife was a Canaanite. King David married a Canaanite. King Solomon had Canaanite people in his family, and the tribe of Simeon was Canaanites. So we're still doing what God told us not to do, except for we're doing it with the seed of Japhet. As you can see here, Halle Berry has had numerous white husbands. You see Kourtney Kardashian, or Khloe Kardashian with Lamar Odom. You see the famous guys from a lot of the movies we watch, black TV stars, they have white wives, even John Legend. And you see here some of the people that we see are famous favorite black TV shows, and you see Sanaa Lathan, you see Kanye West, and you see Michael Jordan. You know, he has a young white wife, and you see Terrence Howard and Tate Diggs, and a lot of the men you see in a lot of the movies, favorite movies that a lot of women like to watch, but they'd be surprised and shocked to see that these men are married to people of other races. Even Robert De Niro, people are doing it. Randy Jackson. The list goes on and on. You can just keep running down the list, but it's primarily black and white. This happened back in slavery, as you can see here, black and white, except for back then it was forced because the black woman didn't have any rights. And like I said earlier, the question is, do the Jews, do the Arabs, do the Indians, do the Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Greeks, Italians, French, and Spaniards all break down the doors to marry a black man? No. So why do we keep repeating something that originally started from the enslavement and rape of our women? Well, that's a big question. We don't have a problem in it. Like I said, we don't have a problem with it, but when they see blacks with other races, people talk about it behind their breath, or they talk about it out loud, and they don't agree with it. So here we see here, give you an example. Michael Jordan is the actor is going to be playing the role of the Human Torch in Fantastic Four coming up. And we all know the Fantastic Four, Johnny Storm, if you follow comic books, is typically a white man. And so a lot of people, had said comments about this. They're really upset. They say, well, he is the wrong color to play Johnny Storm or the Human Torch. Johnny Storm is white, blonde, and he has blue eyes. And so people are saying, well, what's so hard to grasp about that simple truth? So people are outraged that Michael Jordan, the actor, black actor, is playing a role for a supposedly white dude. But how about Hollywood putting white people as Egyptian people? As we see with Charles Heston and the Ten Commandments, you see Noah is white. You see in Exodus, Gods and Kings, you see the Pharaoh of Egypt was a white man. Even though history and archaeological findings and facts proves that the ancient Egyptians had black, kinky, tight curled hair, and they were dark-skinned people. They were black. They were descendants of Ham. The real Egyptians were black Africans, and you can see their hair texture and their skin color. But yet Hollywood still likes to promote whitenization. Integration of blacks into white America, and then they whitenize everything. But please don't say anything. Don't ask no questions. That's what they want blacks to do. They said don't ask no questions. Just take it as it is and believe that everything in the Bible, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the Jews, Adam and Eve, Yeshua, Jesus Christ, we're all white. Then who are we? Oh, you guys are cursed of Canaan. You're Hamitic. people. And we are being trained and brainwashed to believe this. But we don't realize that the Bible is about black people. The Bible is centered in an area where people had color, like Denzel Washington says in the movie Malcolm X. So the tribe of Judah family tree started out with a Hamitic black Canaanite mother. And we all know, and you see pictures of Jesus, he does not look like he's Hamitic. Like, he doesn't look like he has any African in him. In 1 Chronicles 2:3, it says that the sons of Judah, and Yeshua came through the tribe of Judah, as well as King David and King Solomon, are and Onan and Shelah, which three were born unto him of the daughter of Bashua, the Canaanitess. So she's a Canaanite. In Genesis 10:6, it says, and the sons of Ham, Cush and Mizraim, Egypt, Cush is Nubia, and Put, Libya, and Canaan. So Canaan was one of the four sons of Ham. Ham in Hebrew means sunburnt, means hot or calm. That's how you pronounce it in Hebrew. Hebrew Strong's 01990, Ham means hot. It means sunburnt, because Ham, the land of Ham, was Africa. This is in the Bible. This is in the Bible, folks. Hebrew Strong's 02526. This is in their lexicon, the Hebrew lexicon, accordance. Ham is also referred to an Egyptian word meaning black. So if Judah's first wife started the family tree was from descendants of Ham, then if we keep going down the line and they keep marrying into the Canaanites, then the people of the tribe of Judah should be black as well. Now, on the curses of Israel in 28:30, we're breaking them down. It says, "Thou shalt build a house, and thou shalt not dwell therein, and thou shalt plant a vineyard, and thou shalt not gather the grapes thereof." Blacks built the infrastructure of the South, and with it the economy. However, we were not allowed to live in the houses we built. After slavery was abolished, the plantation homes and everything we built, you know, they kept, and they used it, and they benefited from it. Of course, they didn't want us to have anything, so they kept us from having getting home ownership and from even owning guns. This would lead to higher rentership in the black community, which was often worse areas than compared to whites. And Malcolm X even pointed out that the rent for blacks in New York City was higher than some of the places that the whites were living in. And of course, the houses in the project were not even on the level of the quality that the whites were living in New York City. So here he say that they didn't want any blacks in their community. We built the White House, we lived in shacks, and maybe not even in a shack at all, depending on how they felt, and the large luxurious plantations that they had with many acres of land. We built this for them, but we were not allowed to live there. The White House even was built by blacks. They don't want us to know that, but they call it the White House. Deuteronomy 28:32 says, "Thy sons and daughters shall be given unto another people, and thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all day long, and there shall not be no might in thy hand." Black families were separated and scattered all across the world thanks to slavery. The sons and daughters were then beaten, raped, experimented on, and killed. This did not happen in the Holocaust, which only lasted 12 years. America believed blacks were soulless creatures, no different than an animal. The labor that blacks, young and old, put into build this country went on without any reward, reparations. Thank you, or I'm sorry. But after the European Jews got reparations from Germany in the Holocaust, nobody ever has talked about that and mentioned that other races have gotten reparations except for blacks. Here we see blacks, children being viewed as slaves. You can see them with the yoke of iron around their neck and chain. Enslaved children, no matter if you were a mulatto or mixed children, you were still considered a slave. Also today, you see blacks being sold to the French and different nations that want to adopt a child, a black child. They can buy a child. So the Holocaust, like I said, lasted 12 years. but did they experience their kids being sold into slavery? No. But what about the Arabs and Indians or Asians? They likewise did not have their children sold into slavery. This was primarily happening to black people taken from West Africa. As you can see, we've seen pretty much a lot of auction signs where they talk about the selling of cargo of Negroes. Usually you talk about their healthy or the athletic build, and they describe at the auction how many men, how many boys, and how many women and girls are going to be at the auction. Sometimes even where they're taken from. And at this auction poster, it says that they just arrived from Sierra Leone, and it tells who was the one that brought them there. So Deuteronomy 20:33, the fruit of thy land and all laborers shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up in the house, and that shall be only oppressed and crushed away. So it talks about how we will till the land and the crops and the livestock, and we will use this to basically a nation that's over us is going to basically benefit from this. So we basically become like servants. And typical coonery and buffoonery and black exploitation, you see Aunt Jemima here serving 2 white men pancakes with different flavored syrup. And as you see here, you see Maxwell House Coffee in the Caribbean. You see a black man serving a white couple off the beach. Lavish dinners and meals were made by the black slave masters. Servant work is all America thinks we were meant to do back then and even today. As you can see this ad here of Cream of Kentucky. So back then we were caregivers for the white slave masters' children. In modern day times we still are caregivers to their children and the parents and the grandparents. Caregiving is a common business that black people do when they are hired by Jewish people to take care of them. So from taking care of their kids all the way to their grandparents, we are mimicking what was done during slavery. Other nations likewise come into Africa, and they use up the land of Africa for their financial benefit. This is being done by China. It's making a lot of money in Africa. And all European countries came into the land of Africa. In addition to enslaving the Africans, they also raped the land of Africa, which is not theirs, of its natural resources. And the gold and the oil and the diamonds, onyx, and the land, the farmland. And as you can see here, you have Belgium, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, Portugal, and Spain, all casting lots for the land of Africa, the continent, different areas. And you can see the control. And as you can see, you talked about the resources that they know about, and they've been using coal and diamonds and fish and gold, iron ore, natural gas, oil, uranium, and other minerals. Also livestock and commercial agriculture, forest land, and herding. So from the backs of blacks, blood, sweat, and tears, this country and this economy has built. However, we don't reap any of the harvest. This was all predicted in the curses. As you can see in this ad too, it says that this guy's like a bellhop. He says that Plymouth is the 1940 beauty. He's the one carrying the bags and luggage. And the people that's enjoying this beauty is not him, it's the white people that you see over there in the corner. It's a luxury ride, but it's not designed for us. This was all predicted in the curses. Deuteronomy 28:34-35. So that thou shalt be mad for the sight of thine eyes which thou shalt see. It also says the Lord shall smite thee in the knees and in the legs with a sore botch that cannot be healed from the sole of thy feet unto the top of thy head. So the slaves worked under harsh conditions for long hours on their knees, in their legs in the field, and then in the slave master's house. they would have developed sores and cracks in the skin and fissures that wouldn't heal from repetitive irritation from continuing to do the work. So you can see here that the slaves were very mad from being whipped by the slave master, and you see the resulting of the whip on the back of the slaves with the keloid skin and the whelps and the lumps and the scars. And you can also see this in Denzel's movie Glory. He's not happy with the Civil War. Ex-slaves fought in the Civil War. Moving on to the past into the present, you see that, like I said earlier in Ferguson, they're not happy, they're mad at the stuff that they're seeing all over the news and what's happening in their community to black people. And it's not getting better, it's getting worse. This has been happening for a long time. It's also been happening in different countries. You see here in Ethiopia, in different areas like Missouri, Ferguson, it's still going on. And like I said earlier, these are possibly warning signs for possibly subliminal or secretive King Alfred plan. The guns are drawn, they're ready, they have their ties, the police is ready. This is also, people are upset and angry and mad at what they're seeing going on in Ebola, the crisis in Ebola, Liberia. A lot of Africans over in Ebola, a lot of Africans that have been affected by Ebola, their country are saying that it was a planned release of the Ebola virus into their country to kill them off, and that it's not going to anywhere except for their countries and not North Africa. And they're starting to do the connections and see that these are not just random infectious disease epidemics. It's happening. They're starting to believe that these are strategically targeted towards certain areas. And the people are still dying out there from Ebola, even though they're trying to contain it. Of course, this causes a lot of anger. Ethiopia, the Ethiopian black Jews protesting in Israel, 2015, very angry and mad. And there you see the news cameras, Israeli police, they're standing there like they don't really care. But you see, even the Israeli police, they got their own portable home camera taking pictures and videotaping the mad, angry black Ethiopian woman. People are hitting the streets in Ethiopia and Israel as well as America. Here we see here is this is in Venice, Italy. This is a statue monument of an angry slave. You see pictures here of angry black people all over. Angry madness is deep inside, deeply rooted. Now, Deuteronomy 28:35, the Lord shall smite thee in the knees and in the legs with a sore botch that can't be healed, and sole of thy foot, the top of the head. So the 12-year-old boy right here in this picture and his 6-year-old sister out here picking cotton. The boy works 12 hours, the girl works 8 hours a day out in the hot field, barefoot or not, picking the cotton. In Georgia, 48,000 African slaves were imported into Georgia during the era of slavery, and it accounted for much of the initial surge of the slave population. When Congress banned the African slave trade in 1808, however, Georgia's slave population did not decline. Instead, the number of slaves imported from the Chesapeake stagnant plantation economy, as well as the number of children born to Georgia's slave mothers, continued to outpace the number of slaves who died or were transported from Georgia. In 1820, the slave population stood at 149,656. In 1840, the slave population had increased to 280,944. And in 1860, on the eve of the Civil War, some 462,000 slaves made up 44% of Georgia's total population. And you can see here, different slave families were out here picking cotton. And you can see the feet of many black Africans that were slaves. In America, Hebrew Israelites, the feet are cracked with sores and fissures hurt very badly, especially when you continue to irritate them with repetitive movements and activities. And you can develop over time. You develop sores in your toes, on the bottom parts of your feet and in your knees from constantly doing this repetitive work. The Europeans made statues about this, and this is also in Argentina, Buenos Aires. They made a picture of an angry slave here, and it's ironic because Argentina is considered the whitest nation now on earth. But at one point, the black African slaves made up a good portion of the people in Argentina. So the question is, what happened to the slaves that were taken to Argentina, and especially after slavery was abolished in Argentina in 1807? Well, the Argentinians concocted a way to get rid of a lot of the blacks, or phase out the blacks. And historians generally attribute two major factors to the sudden disappearance of black Africans from the country. One was the deadly war against Paraguay from 1865 to 1870, in which thousands of blacks fought on the front lines. Some believe they were forced to fight on the front lines in the Argentine military, and they died, as well as other wars, and then the onset of yellow fever in Buenos Aires in 1871. Now, the heavy casualties that was suffered by the black Argentinians in military combat created a huge gender gap amongst the African population. And a lot of these men died, so it was a whole bunch of women, in a circumstance that appeared to have led to black women to mate with the white Europeans, further diluting the black population. And many other black Argentinians fled to neighboring countries such as Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, or Uruguay, which were viewed as somewhat more hospitable for them. Because Argentina at one point was called the land of vanishing blacks. And it was alleged that the president of Argentina from 1868 to 1874, Domingo Faustino Sarmiento, sought to wipe out blacks from the country in a policy of covert genocide through extremely repressive policies. Like I said, forced recruitment of Africans into the army, and by forcing blacks to remain in neighborhoods where disease would kill them, especially without adequate health care. Sarmiento wrote in his diary in 1848 that in the United States, 4 million are black, and within 20 years will be 8 million. What is to be done with such blacks hated by the white race? Slavery is a parasite that the vegetation of English colonization has left attached to leafy tree of freedom. Well, by 1895, there were reportedly so few blacks left in Argentina that the government did not even bother registering African descended people in the national census. The black people there were upset, there are black people that still live here. But the CIA World Factbook denoted and stated that Argentina's population was 97% white, comprising people descended from Spanish and Italian immigrants, therefore classifying it as the whitest nation in Latin America. Here we see Fidel Nadal. He's an Afro-Argentinian musician. You see back here in earlier times, you see the black Afro-Argentinians here on this picture on the right. So the curse of Israel continues with the Deuteronomy 28:36. The Lord shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation which neither thy fathers or you have known, and there you shall serve other gods, wood and stone. So blacks have adopted the religions of our slave masters, or the nations from which we have been scattered to. We are also brainwashed by the media to worship sex, money, and material things. We work for these things. For example, cars and houses and phones and electronics, clothes, jewelry, and video games, bills and debtors. And these things enslave us into working for other people our whole life. So what about the Israelites per the curses? It talks about serving other gods. What about the Israelites who converted to Islam? Many Israelites converted to Islam. People don't know this. So there were many African tribes and countries who were once Jewish and came from a Hebrew Israelite heritage, or once had Jewish populations. But after the Muslim religious invasions of such places since the Second World War, many of these tribes were converted to Islam. Two such tribes that have been recently brought to find out was to have Hebraic roots was the Maasai tribe from Tanzania, who resides near Mount Kilimanjaro, and then the Kuria tribe, who also practiced circumcision. There was a guy named David Sachs. He quoted that as the bare statistics amply demonstrate, the story of Jewish life on the African continent since the last World War has been one of steady decline, to the point that many once active communities are now distinct or at best operating on a significantly scaled down level. There are fewer than 50 Jews left in Zambia, once the presence of 18 different centers. Namibia, at its peak, numbering over 400 souls, has likewise dwindled to a few dozen. Organized Jewish life in Mozambique, such as it was, all but have disappeared from the demise of Portuguese rule and the onset of ruinous civil war in the early 1970s. A trickle of individuals have since made their way back to the country, but there is some way to go before establishing a Jewish community on any formal organized basis, which will be possible. 100 remain in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, down from over 2,000 years in the days of Belgian colonial rule, and the Jewish community in Kenya, while still reasonably viable, is at around 260 souls, only half the size it was at its height. Now, Israel, the Vatican, and Islamic Arabs have tried over the years to hide, manipulate, or destroy any evidence linking blacks to the ancient Hebrew Israelites. Some manuscripts written in Hebrew were found in different parts of Mali, some dating back to the 1200s during the time of the rule of Mali Emperor Mansa Musa. But we don't need tons of pictures to know that the original Jews were black. We just got to use critical thinking and read our Bible and decipher what it says. If we use common sense, and we can see that the people of the Middle East, North Africa, and Israel now are invaders of the land and therefore are imposters. Even Israel news and publications and websites, this was the Arutz Shiva Israel Nation News reported in 2013 that they had in Mali found different manuscripts in Timbuktu, Mali, and one of them was written in Hebrew. A lot of the Hebrew manuscripts were torched and burned by the Malian Islamics. They torched this South African-funded Ahmed Baba Institute in Mali, where the documents were kept. And they told reporters that thousands of priceless manuscripts from ancient times was set ablaze by the rebels who fled the French and Malian troops who were closing in on the Saharan city. Now, Mali isn't like in sub-Saharan Africa. It's mostly black if you go there and look. And a lot of these manuscripts were buried in the sand or in caves for centuries in wooden trunks and in boxes, and some of them are written in Hebrew. But the question is, what are Hebrew manuscripts doing in Africa if the Ashkenazi Jews say the Israelites scattered to Europe and then turned white? Somebody's not telling the truth. So these 1 million old manuscripts found in Mali, Timbuktu, trading documents were from the 15th century. Some of them reference links between the Jews running caravan routes from North Africa, Morocco to Timbuktu. These documents were written in Arabic and had Hebrew script written around the margins as sort of a code to let people know the documents were from black Hebrew Israelites, because they probably was able to speak both languages. But of course, if you was a Jew and you was in predominantly Muslim territory, you didn't want them to know that you were Jew, that you were speaking in Hebrew or practicing Judaism. You probably had to practice in disguise. So this trade existed from Morocco to Timbuktu, involving gold and salt. Many of the Hebrew Israelites scattered down these trade routes from North Africa, from Iberia to North Africa, all the way down to West Africa, Mali, Timbuktu, a little north part of West Africa. Islam was popular at the time, so like I said, the Israelites had to be crypto Jews. They had to practice the Mosaic law Judaism in secret while they followed these trade routes all over Africa. Many black Jews in Mali were forced to convert to Islam, as per the curses Deuteronomy 27:36, especially after the rise of Askia Muhammad in 1492, who was the emperor of the Songhai Empire, which is part of the old Ghana Empire. Some black Hebrew Israelites also fell back into Africa after the Spanish Inquisition in 1492, while others were put on ships to be slaves in the Spanish colonies in the Caribbean. Some of these black Jews are now discovering their Jewish roots because they know that their forefathers were once practicing Judaism, but now they are practicing Islam. And they've actually, some black Africans over in that area have admitted to this when they, go back and search their family roots and learn from stuff from their grandparents. Now, again, we're going to talk about the Israelites converted to Islam. The story of the rise and rapid decline of the sub-Saharan African Jewish communities, as one would expect, mirrors the rise and decline of European settlement in these countries in the post-independence era. Jews arrived with the European settlers. In the case of southern and northern Rhodesia, which is today's Zimbabwe and Zambia. And they were amongst the very first settlers and by and large departed with them. Taking as a whole and leaving aside South Africa for a time being, the historical verdict on Jewish settlement in southern Africa would seem to be that it was both a comparatively recent and temporary phenomenon lasting less than a century. This verdict may change in the event of there being a renewed wave of Jewish immigration to the countries concerned. But this is certainly not on the cards of the short term. Even swifter was the demise of the vastly more numerous and far longer established North African Jewish communities. The combined result of the desire to make an aliyah, which is a return, and the wave of persecution that followed the establishment of Israel in 1948, and also in the case of Algeria, political instability. But as we all know, a lot of the true black Hebrew Israelites from Africa are not allowed to Israel. The only ones been allowed have been the Ethiopian Jews. So the European Jews, close to 600,000 Jews immigrated during the first 2 decades after World War II. About 2/3 of these to Israel, and most of the balance to France. Prior to this, Morocco and Algeria had Jewish communities well in excess of South Africa's at the time. So you had all these Sephardic Jews that were living in North Africa, and you had the European Jews that came to Israel after 1948. And so these Moroccan Jews and Algerian Jews and Tunisian Jews were all classified under Sephardic Jews. But the problem is that they learned Judaism and a lot of their cultures and traditions from when they came in there back in 700 BC, and also hanging around the real black Hebrew Israelites. But the people that were not truly of Israel didn't have to go through the curses. They didn't exhibit slavery. They didn't exhibit everything that was listed in the curses. They still maintained that they were Jews, but they didn't fit any of the curses. So we know that these are the people that are the imposters. Different people, Muslim travelers, people that also were cartographers, which drew up maps. They created maps, such as Al-Idrisi. He was a Muslim from Spain, Andalusia. He wrote about his travels in Africa. He said that in West Africa, or the old Ghana Empire, he said, to the southward of Barissa, at the distance of 10 days' march, lies the land of Lamlam, into which excursions or invasions are made by the inhabitants of Barissa, which is Mende, which is over in that area near West Africa, along the coast of the North Atlantic Ocean. Sala, Takrur, Falani, and Ghana, the old Ghana Empire. There they take numbers captive, whom they carry away to their own countries and dispose of to the merchants trading there. thereafterwards, they sell them into all parts of the world. So he's telling you that a lot of the captives over in this area, they take and they send them to all different parts of the world. And as you can see on the maps, Takrur or Tekrur, you see, is over there along the west coast of Africa, near Senegal, near the Senegal River. And there's a lot of slave ports and coast over there in Senegal. You can go over to Senegal right now on the coast, and you could probably visit one of the slave ports where they would hold slaves before they would dock on the ships. And so they're telling you all this stuff. This guy is basically giving the proof that the Hebrew Israelites were sold into other countries, other nations. And as you can see, the Mende tribes, you can see here also on the bottom map, are also included in this Ghana Empire, this old Ghana Empire. So another person named J. Leighton Wilson, he also quoted that mixed up with these pagan nations and customs, there are many obvious traces of Judaism, both in northern and southern Guinea. And in the latter, some undoubtedly have traces of a corrupted form of Christianity, which have probably traveled across the continent from ancient Ethiopia, where Christianity was once firmly established. If you notice, Guinea is along the coast of West Africa, along the whole belt where you see the Ivory Coast, the Grain Coast, the Gold Coast, which is Ghana, Benin, Togo, sits right between Ghana and Nigeria, and you see Nigeria, and you see Cameroon. This is all part of Guinea. And they talked about Judaism mixed up in these areas in northern and southern Guinea. And it's not a coincidence that these people living along the west coast of Africa from which the slaves were taken, they were all Christians. Even the Ethiopian Falasha Jews were all introduced to Christianity. And they believe that this is the reason why they also practiced Christianity, was from learning it from the Ethiopians, the ancient Ethiopians. As you can see here along the west coast, you see here in Benin Toga area, you see where they on the map they have the words Kingdom of Judah, or Wiada, or Ajuda, which is the words that the French and the Portuguese had named for the slave port, or Ouida, O-U-I-D-A-H, was one of the words too for the slave port in Benin. So how much proof do we need? And here again is the Arab Muslim from Spain, Al-Idrisi. He says here in the whole land of Lamlam, which is Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger, there are two small cities, or as it were villages, and those are Malel and Dao, D-A-U, situated at the distance of 4 days' journey from each other. Their inhabitants, as people of these parts relate, are Jews, most of them unbelieving and ignorant. And he also says here, when any of these inhabitants of the kingdom of Lamlam comes to have the use of his reason, he is burnt in the face in the temples. This they do to distinguish each other, so they're distinguishing themselves, the Jews, from the people that are not Jews, the other Hamitic or African tribes that are amongst them. All their countries and dominions are near the certain river, which is the Niger River, flowing to the Nile. Now the Niger River flows throughout major parts of West Africa, also into Nigeria. It is not known whether there is any inhabited place to the south of the kingdom of Lamlam. That kingdom joins on the west to Mexara, which is Mali and Niger, on the east of Vankara or Wanagara, which is Chad, and on to the north to Ghana, the Ghana Empire, and on to the south to the desert. And its people use a different language from those of the Mexara and Ghana. Here are pictures right here of the area of Lamlam, and then you can see at the top picture you see the Niger River, and you see the words Nigertia, and you see Lamlam over down to the bottom right hand side. Niger River runs throughout that whole western African part right there. And as you see, as he quoted before, in the whole land of Lamlam, which is Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger, there are but two small cities. And they said that in these two cities, Malel and Dao, the people that inhabited these areas were Jews. This was like 500-600 years ago. Also, Leo Africanus, he quoted, "Howbeit they say that upon the Nilus, the Nile, do inhabit two great and populous nations, one of the Jews towards the west, under the government of a mighty king." This is a picture of the map, the Nile River. He's quoting where this area is at, according to him when he traveled. And so the question is, if you have all these black Jews documented by Arab and European historians and travelers and cartographers, that they come and they travel within Africa, and they observe the people living in there and inhabitants, and they draw maps, and they also write narratives and documents, how can the black West African Israelite be related to the white European Jew? Because we all know that two white people can't make a black person. Two Europeans cannot make a black African child. It's not possible, because they cannot get dark. There's no genetic disease that makes white skin turn dark, as in blacks that can have children that are lighter from albinism or albinism, or you can start to reverse the pigment with vitiligo. Even use fading creams that temporarily lighten your skin. So even though Caucasians and white people, they use tanners and bronzers to make their skin appear darker, the effects of this tanner and bronzer can easily be removed by using soap and water in one day. But the black race has genetic diseases that can turn our skin, or submutations that could turn our skin lighter, as you can see in different complexions of brown skin that we see in Africa, in South Africa, and in Nigeria, and other countries. So here in this picture, the question is, who looks authentic? Does the Ethiopian Jew look authentic, or does the European Ashkenazi Jew look authentic? Down here we see an Ashkenazi Jew woman on the left and an Ethiopian Jew on the right. Is there any biologic relation? Here we see a strict Orthodox Hasidic black Jew practicing Judaism. Is he more authentic than a white Jew? So the question is tradition versus blood. There were no whites living in the Holy Land at the time that the holy books were written. Whites, many people believe they were in the north, living in caves, barbaric, with a lot of hair, to keep the body warm. And they took the traditions and wrote themselves into history and tried to write black people out. Except that they couldn't blast away all the black faces on the statues and art in the tombs of Egypt and other places that proved that we were God's original people. It's a picture of a rabbi. It's in black and white. He obviously knew the truth, because he knew it way back when the pictures were still in black and white. You see the menorah. And so when Jesus talks about, or Yeshua talks about in the Bible, proselyte is somebody that is a convert to a religion meaning Judaism or Islam. The word proselyte was also used in the Septuagint for a stranger or newcomer to Israel, like a person that converted to Judaism from paganism. Neither the Greeks nor the Romans were indigenous to the homeland and birthland of Yeshua, Jesus, yet they imperialized the land, and many converted to Judaism. And this I will explain in detail later. And genetically, Yeshua had a mixture of, if you go along the tribe of Judah, a mixture of Hamitic and Shemitic blood. And this is a known fact. If you look at, and I'll break down later the tribes that made up Mary, the mother of Jesus, and also Joseph, who was his earthly father. And the Bible in the Revelations talks about, in Revelations 2:9-3:9, talks about, I know your tribulation and poverty, but you are rich, meaning the real Jews, but he knows also the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, brought the synagogue of Satan. And the real Jews back in the day, they lived within, scattered within the landmass called Soudan, Soudan. But before that, it was called Sojuda because it was nicknamed the land of Judah. But then they shortened it to Soudan, and it basically encompassed all of West Africa, or that part of West Africa where Negro land, Negritia, and Guinea is, all the way across Central Africa, all the way across to East Africa. And this was mostly the tribes were scattered, and then eventually the Israelites were scattered into the Bantus lands of Central Africa or East Africa. And as you can see here, Ethiopia consisted on different maps of different parts of Africa, not just the part that we see today as the country Ethiopia. As you see here, Negro land encompasses a lot of the countries like Mali and Chad, and you see Nigeria and Ghana and Benin and Togo and Ivory Coast, which is the grain coast, Sierra Leone, Senegal, Gambia. These are all countries over here in the mix of Negro land and Guinea. These are ancient maps from the 1700s and the 1800s. Even, again, when I talked about Mr. J. Leighton Wilson, in his book called Western Africa, Its History, Condition, and Prospects, he says, whether the natives of the country have a Jewish distinction between Diaboli and Diamonia in northern Guinea is not certainly known, but the inhabitants of southern Guinea undoubtedly have. He also states that mixed up with these pagan nations and customs, there are many obvious traces of Judaism, ancient Judaism, which is Karaite Judaism, which is what the Ethiopian Philosophists were practicing when the European Jews found them, both in northern and southern Guinea. And in the latter, some undoubtedly have traces of a corrupted form of Christianity, which probably have traveled across the continent from, again, ancient Ethiopia, where Christianity was firmly established. So right here, he's admitting to finding traces of Judaism scattered throughout northern and southern Guinea, Negro land and Guinea, and also encroaching down the Bantu areas of the Congo and Cameroon. Even Leo Africanus, he wasn't an Israelite. He was one of many Europeans and Arabs, Gentiles who went into Africa and wrote about what he saw during the time of Askia the Great. During the 15th century, 16th century, he said that the king, Askia the Great, is a declared enemy of the Jews. He will not allow any to live in the city, Gao, which is Timbuktu, or Timbuktu and Gao, both cities. And he says that here, if he hears it is said that a Berber merchant frequents them or does business with them, he confiscates his good. Now, Leo Africanus is saying that basically the Askia the Great was against the Jews. He was an enemy of the Jews because he conquered the ancient Songhai Empire, and he basically took over, and after that point it was a Muslim empire. And he basically said if anybody does business or frequents the Jews, that he would confiscate his goods. They basically get punished. And Askia Muhammad was the emperor of the Songhai Empire from 1493 to 1528. This was even before the peak of the transatlantic slave trade. This is real stuff. So we see here that the ancient records of the Muslim caliphate leaders of the sultans, they had access to old records in their kingdom, and the people there have found through extensive research that the original people of Ghana that started or founded the ancient kingdom of Songhai starting in 700 AD were actually descendants of the biblical Hebrew Israelites who had migrated into Africa from East and North Africa. Some notable people of the Songhai Empire was Sunni Ali, and he ruled along with other kings of the Songhai Empire in Ghana until Askia Muhammad or Askia the Great came along and and changed everything up. And then after that point, it was under Islamic rule. So it was shown by extracts from the Hausa records, of which the original has unfortunately been destroyed, that the people of ancient Ghana were anciently known by the name of Taurud, or the Taurud people, and the Soniki people were called Sarankali. Both people claimed in the past to have come from the territory lying between the Nile River and the Euphrates River, which is the land between two rivers. And this is supported in the Bible. A lot of people lived in this area between the land of two rivers. But in Genesis 15:18 it says that in the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, "Unto thy seed have I given this land from the river of Egypt," which is the Nile River, into the great river, the river Euphrates. And so a lot of people lived in this land, the Hebrew Israelites, along with the Canaanites and the Edomites and the Kenites, which we'll talk about later, and the Jebusites. And this is basically the Middle East, Levant, and Israeli area. And as you can see here on the map, this is West Africa. Most of the dynasties and caliphates, like the Sokoto and the Bornu Caliphate, and the Songhai Empire, and the Mali Empire, the Old Ghana Empire, these all empires were existing in West Africa. And different tribes of people were sometimes called by different names. But during this time, there were a lot of Hebrew Israelite tribes that were living amongst this region, and some of them may eventually have converted to Islam. Reason being that many Muslims, black Muslims that live in this area right now, they've actually researched into their family tree and their heritage and descendants, and have actually found out that they've had great grandparents and relatives that in the past were practicing Judaism, but over maybe 2 or 3 generations down the line, eventually they converted to Islam. And this is interesting fact to know that a lot of the black people live in these areas like Mali and Niger and Nigeria and Gambia and Senegal. A lot of them actually, their forefathers started out practicing the ancient form of Judaism. And just like the Bible talks about, you will be in a land not that you don't know, that your fathers didn't know or you didn't know, and you will serve a king or the rulers, which is, the Muslim caliphate rulers, and you will basically worship their gods, wood and stone. And we all know that the stone that Muslims pray to Mecca, they do that a couple of times a day, and so that's the stone, the Kaaba, that they're praying to. So we talked about the Hausa earlier in the last slide, and as you can see here, the Hausa and Fulani were segregated and positioned in upper parts of Nigeria. At the bottom, you see the south east part of Nigeria. You see the Igbo land, and then on the southwest part of Nigeria, you see Yoruba land. And Yoruba land also encompassed part of Benin and Togo. And so later we'll see exactly who these Hausa and Fulani people are. A lot of times they've been associated with the Kushite branch of Ham, the Fulani, and a lot of times their skin complexion is a little bit lighter than your typical Nigerians. And they have a different, not all of them have wide noses and kinky Negro type hair, as you expect most Africans to have. But they still nonetheless have brown skin, and they have hair that would be seen in today's African American. So the Hausa the Hausa language is a Chadic language with the largest number of speakers spoken as a first language by about 35 million people, and as a second language by 15 million in Nigeria and millions more in other countries. The Hausa and Fulani are found in a lot of different countries, including North Africa and other places. And at least a total of 50 million speakers altogether. The Hausa language is native in Nigeria, Ghana, Benin, Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Sudan, and Togo. During the Sokoto Caliphate, a lot of these people were ruling in the Sokoto Caliphate, the Hausa and the Fulani. Here we see a picture of ancient map of Africa before the Europeans drawn out the map and started making territorial boundaries and lines that separated the countries that we now see in Africa. So the Tarood and Tarood, and also the Sarankali and the Soniki peoples' original homeland where they migrated from, was described by Muhammad Bello, who was the second sultan of the Sokoto Empire. And this guy reigned from 1815 until 1837. This was prior to the abolishment of slavery in the United States of America, and was an active writer of history, poetry, and Islamic studies. And he was the son and primary aide to Usman Dan Fodio. He was the founder of the Sokoto Caliphate and the first sultan of this caliphate. So here we're going to discuss about a historical account given by Bello to Hugh Clapperton, who visited the court of Bello in 1824 and wrote a lot about the generosity and intelligence of the sultan. Clapperton was very impressed at the writing works by Bello. And so Muhammad Bello told Hugh Clapperton in detail the history and migrations of the inhabitants of all of Africa, from North, South, East, and West Africa. The geographical account compiled by order of Sultan Bello compromised not merely Sudan, but the whole of Central Africa, from Darfur, Sudan, to Bambara, which is Timbuktu, another word for Timbuktu, inclusive under the appellation of Beld el Takrur. So Muhammad Bello, like I said, was the second sultan of the Sokoto Empire, Muslim Empire, and reigned from 1815 to 1837. He was the son of Usman Dan Fodio, who was the first sultan of Sokoto Caliphate Empire. Following the Fulani War, we talked about them earlier, the Sokoto Caliphate was one of the largest states in Africa and included large populations, both Fulani and Hausa. And here you see on the map, you can see that the Sokoto Empire encompassed what is modern-day Nigeria. And if you look at the bottom, you can see the words Guinea, because you had Upper and Lower Guinea. Lower Guinea went along the lines of Congo and Cameroon, and you also see the word Bornu. And also in these areas you have Yoruba land and Igbo land. And here's a picture of Muhammad they had depicted. So Muhammad Bello quoted that these Tarood or Tarood people, it is said, were originally Jews. Others say Christians, that they came from the land between two rivers, the Nile and the Euphrates, and established themselves next to the Jews who inhabited the land of Cape Verde. The Cape Verde Islands you see is right off the coast of West Africa, near Senegal and Gambia. And that whenever they oppressed or encroached upon the Jews, the latter had always recourse to the protection of the officers of the Shahabat, or friends of Muhammad, who then ruled over them. So this is what they found written in the books, and this is according to the journal of a second expedition into the interior of Africa, from the Bight of Benin to Sokoto. And as you can see, the Sokoto Caliphate is smack dab encompassing most of Nigeria, maybe parts of Cameroon, Niger. You see Cape Verde off to the left, and there's a lot of some African Americans. They have roots from Cape Verde Islands. And the question is also if Muhammad Bello quoted that these people, who they call by Tarood or Tarood people, were originally Jews, you gotta remember and think, well, where did they learn how to practice Judaism? And what type of Judaism was they practicing? Was they practicing Babylonian Talmud Judaism that the European Jews practiced, or were they practicing the old form of Karaite Judaism, which strictly goes by the Old Testament, and they don't have any Talmud or Mishnah or Gemara? And you got to remember, these Africans, they didn't just make a trek or a trip to Jerusalem and Israel to learn how to practice Judaism, because during this time, the majority of the European Ashkenazi Jews were not even in Israel at that time. You got to remember, back in during the Crusades, the Muslim had rulership over Judea and Palestine, and even until the 1800s, the Palestine or Palestinia were still under Muslim rule, until the British came and started to settle there, and they all started to swing an undercover deal with the British, or with the Zionist Jews in America, and the Rothschilds to take back the land of Israel. And so, if for over, say, 700 to 1,000 years, if the Palestine or Judea was under Muslim rulership, then how could these African people in the 1800s be practicing Judaism? They had to have had this passed on from the forefathers, generation to generation to generation. But Muhammad, a Muslim himself, knew that the people living in this area were originally Jews, and that's something to really think about. So here we see, this is a picture of the Senegal River Valley, and it's a map. And as you can see, you have different African countries near this area: Mauritania, and you have Senegal, you have Gambia, and you have Guinea and Mali. And the Senegal River Valley encompasses this whole area you see on the red dotted lines, because as you can see, the Senegal River, the way it flows from the Atlantic Ocean. And so Muhammad Bello also gave the location of migration of the Sarankali, or the Soninke people, that we talked about as well. He states that their origins was near to Bambara, it's another word for Timbuktu, Mali, and that there is a province of the Tarwood and that of Fouta, which is the Senegal River Valley area, traditionally known as Fouta, F-O-U-T-A or F-U-T-A, Turo, or the Fouta. And I don't know, it's hard to see, but at the bottom part of the map, right above the word Guinea, kind of on the outside of the red dotted line, you'll see the word Fouta, which Muhammad Bello said are extensive and inhabited by their own people and by those of Sarankali or Soninke, also called Ajam, meaning alien or foreigner. So this was the word that they gave to people that were not natives or inhabitants of this land. They were like nomadic people that were foreigners to the land. And so these people, in addition to the Tarwa people, the Sarankali or Soninke people, were also affiliated with practicing Judaism. So the Sultan of the Sokoto Empire, Muhammad Bello, again stated on page 337 of the book entitled Journal of a Second Expedition into the Interior Africa, he stated that the Torud, the Tarud, and the Soninke people ruled and inhabited parts of the territory of Mali, which is Guinea. Muhammad Bello quoted this also in traditional account of different nations of Africa. And above, you'll see this map. This is the Holman Ayres map of the local slave trade in West Africa. And as you can see, this map is from 1743. You can see Guinea along the coast of West Africa. And you can see that different people are called Negroland, Ethiopia, and here we see at the bottom part you have Lower Guinea. So looking at some more maps, you see different kingdoms. You have the Songhai Kingdom in the upper map, the map to the upper left. You have Morocco, you have Messina, you have Mali, and you have the Great Fulo, and you have Akan and Oyo, and you have Mandingo. Mandingo tribe is popular or predominant in Gambia, and some of the people from Ghana are of half Akan and Oyo stock. If you ask any person from Ghana, ask them, what tribe they're from, they might say Ashanti, they might say half Akan and half Oyo, and you ask anybody from Gambia or Senegal, they might say Mandingo. And so here we see the quote, the kingdom of Mali, which is parentheses Guinea, is an ancient and flourishing country and comprises two other provinces. One is Bambara, or Timbuktu, which contains rivers, woods, sands, and gold mine, and is occupied by the Sudan. Sudan is spelled in different ways, S-O-O-D-A-N, S-O-U-D-A-N, who are still infidels and possess great power. The other, on the west of it, is Futa, which we talked about earlier, the region on the Senegal River, which is inhabited by the Tarwood, and also the Soninke or Ajam. And this is also noted in the book. You see at the bottom map, you will see the words Mandingo. And Mandingo is pretty much covering up a lot of the west coast of Africa, along the areas of Senegal and Gambia, and Sierra Leone, and Liberia, and Guinea, Ivory Coast. And as you can see here in this other map to the right, you see Burkina Faso, and you'll see the Ivory Coast, and you'll see the different breakdowns of the tribes in Ghana with Akan and Iwi and Oyo. You see Togo next to it. So in 1853, the German scholar and explorer Heinrich Barth visited Timbuktu, Mali, on behalf of the British government. During his stay, he consulted a copy of the Tariq al-Sudan and the Tariq al-Fatash in his investigation of the history of the Songhai Hebrew Israelite Empire, which started way back and continued with different kings. And here we see a map of the Songhai Empire, and you see Wangara, you see Mali, you see the Yoruba kingdoms, you see the Tuareg Berbers were positioned at, you see the Turker, and you see in the yellow kind of like the extension of the Songhai Empire. So in the Tariq al-Sudan and the Tariq al-Fatash are West African chronicles written in Arabic in the second half of the 17th century, which is basically like the 1650s AD. It provides an account of the Hebrew kingdom called Songhai from the reign of Za el-Yamini, the first ruler of this empire, starting at 300 AD, which is around the time of Roman Emperor Constantine, to the time that Soni Ali ruled, the last Hebrew Israelite Empire ruler. He ruled from 1464 to 1492, right before Askia Muhammad came into play. Around that time, the Spanish Inquisition was happening in Iberia, kicking out the black Moors and some of the black Hebrew Israelites that were in Spain and Portugal. So this kingdom called Songhai were around from 300 AD to 1400s AD. So it's like over 1,000 years, up to the downfall of the Arabs in 1599, with a few references to events following in the following century. So this is a long time that Hebrew Israelites had rulership over a certain area that most people nowadays would call West Africa, Negroland, or Nigratia, or Guinea. And so we see some more maps of the Songhai Empire. You see how it was called the Ghana Empire in the 11th century, which is about 1000 AD, and then Mali in the 14th century, which is like 1300 AD, and the Songhai 15th century, which is around 1400 AD, and the different outlines of the map. And so according to the records, such as like I said, the Tariq al-Sudan and Tariq al-Fatash, the first recorded Hebrew presence in West Africa may have occurred with the arrival of a guy, first Za ruler of Kokuya, and his brother, located near the Niger River. This guy was known as Za el-Yemeni, meaning he comes from Yemen. Now, history states that Za el-Yemeni came to Kuka about 300 AD. An ancient abode of the Songhai tribe. He established a line of kings known as the Za, or the Jah, or the Dia dynasty. This founder of the first Sudanic dynasty in Western Africa was a black Hebrew. The Tariq al-Sudan states that there were 14 Za rulers of the Kuyuka after Za el-Yemeni, before the rise of Islam in the region. So even before the rise of Islam in that particular region, there were 14 rulers that were Hebrew Israelites from the Za Empire. Here we see here, this is actually a picture of one of the kings, sheikhs, or sultans of Jordan. His name is Abdullah I. And standing behind him is three Habani Yemeni Jewish bodyguards. The brother Saeed, Salah, and Sadia. This is 1922. However, the original Yemenis during the 11th and 12th century were black, because the Ottoman Turks had not yet took over. And as you can see in the background, these Habani Yemeni Jewish bodyguards don't have your typical white Arab appearance. They have some color in their skin. A lot of Yemenis do have the appearance of possibly having Negroid features, or looking like mixed black people, or some African Americans that are lighter skinned. And here we have a map of Arabia back in the 1900s early, and you have the Hijaz area, the Hijaz mountains. You have Mecca and Medina there, and you have Yemen. It's a part. You have a little corner called Aden, because that right in the area was the Gulf of Aden. You have Oman. So this right here is a 13th century slave market picture in Yemen. Notice the 13th century that they had the white skin. This is because they were of Turkish stock. They were not the original Yemenites. And you can see the black people down at the bottom. Of course, they were selling black slaves during that time. So the Razula dynasty in Yemen was established in 1229 by Umar ibn Razul. And Umar ibn Razul was appointed deputy governor by the Ubayds in 1223. When the last Ubayd ruler left Yemen in 1229, Umar stayed in the country as caretaker, and he subsequently declared himself an independent king by assuming the title al-Malik al-Mansur, the king, which means the king assisted by Allah. The dynasty is regarded as the greatest native Yemeni state since the fall of the pre-Islamic Himyarite kingdom. They were, of course, these people, as you can see by their skin complexion, of Turkish descent, from the north through Japhet and Torgomoth, but claimed an ancient Yemenite origin to justify their rule. The Basulas were not the first dynasty to create a fictitious genealogy for political purposes, nor were they doing anything out of the ordinary in the tribal context of Arabia. So these white Yemenites did not endure the curses. They learned, the ones that converted to Judaism or called themselves Yemeni Jews, they learned Judaism from the black Hebrews that scattered into Arabia and Yemen, which back in those days were called Arabia Felix, possibly from, like we talked about, the man named Za el-Yemeni, who traveled from Arabia and Yemen across the Horn of Africa into Africa, West Africa, and starting up the Songhai Empire. So here we see on the left, we see pictures of Yemeni Jews. You see their skin complexion is darker than the Ashkenazi Jews. The people at the top, at the bottom, you see some of the Yemeni Jews have that white skin appearance, just in dark features, dark hair, and dark eyes, just like the Ottoman Turks, because the Ottoman Turks did come down and conquer Arabia. But as you see the guy on the right, looks just like a regular black guy, because the original Arabs were black. And there's a quote by a guy named Miskin al-Darimi. and he says that I am Miskeen. For those who know me, my color is dark, the color of the Arabs. But which Yemeni fits the picture? The Yemeni Jews or the black Yemeni man? This man is from Yemen. So according to a Miskeen who lived many centuries ago, would have to be the guy that you see that looks like a typical African or African American. So the original Yemeni Arab Semitic Jews should have been black. Here we see some more pictures of Yemeni girls in their village, and as you can see, they all have color in their skin. Some of them look like African American girls today that we see in our communities, whether they be mixed or not mixed. These are black Yemeni boys, forgotten people. They don't show you these pictures because they don't want you to know that they exist. These are black Yemeni boys in the outskirts of Sana'a, Yemen. The Akdam, a social group in Yemen, is set apart by their African features. Most of them live in the slums on the outskirts of Yemen's main cities. So these kids that are black, that are the original Arabs, and if they are Jewish, they could have some more original Jewish stock in them. They are going through the curses. They're not living a life of prosperity. So how did some Yemenis get lighter? It's a big question. The Razulid dynasty in Yemen was established in 1229 by Umar ibn Razul, like we talked about. And when the last Ayyubid ruler left Yemen in 1229, this guy named Umar stayed in the country, and he assumed himself to be the leader of the Yemenite dynasty, but he was really of Turkish descent. And as you see here, these are pictures of black Arabs. The one on the left you see with the horse, he's a Shamar Arab. And so the original or indigenous darker skinned Shamar Arabs from Arabia were the original Arabs of Yemen. This guy over here, this is a Mahra man, and a Mahra tribe of Oman and Hadramaut are thought to descend from the Sabaean tribe called the Romanites. Excuse my pronunciation, and still speak the Himyarite-related dialects. And you can see their skin complexion is black. So we all have seen the proof that the original Arabs, the Semites, and the Cushites were black. But the best way to get a true picture of what the original Arabs of the past look like is to ask the original Arabs of the past themselves. So let's take a look at what the original pure Arabs of 1400 years ago said about the appearance of the pure Arabs. So if we begin with Miskeen al-Darimi, which we talked about earlier, who's a well-known pure-blooded Arab poet that lived in the 7th century AD. So he lived around 600 AD, around the time that Islam was started. Remember that there were Arabs before Islam. Arab is just a term, doesn't mean that they are in the Muslim religion, because if the Arabs are descendants of Ishmael and the sons of Keturah, then we know that Ishmael and Keturah and her sons lived way before Islam was even a religion. So Miskeen was the nickname, but his real name was Rabi, the son of Amir, the son of Unayf, the son of Sharif, the son of Amru, the son of Zayd. It just keeps going on and on. But basically, Miskeen was black skin. He once proposed to a girl, and she rejected him because of his blackness and his poorness. The girl later married a rich man who was from a tribe not as pure Arab as Miskeen's tribe. This probably hurt Miskeen's feelings. Miskeen one day saw the little girl who rejected him because of his blackness and poorness sitting with her husband, who was from a tribe not as pure as Miskeen's, and Miskeen stopped and said to them, I am Miskeen. For those who know me, my color is dark, the color of the Arabs. Here you have this man from 600 AD saying that he's an Arab and his skin is dark. Most Arabs today that you see in Palestine or Lebanon or Iraq or Iran When they describe their skin complexion, they will not say that the skin is dark, because the skin is not dark, the skin is white, just about the same as Caucasians. Many of them will also say that they have descendants from the north and that they are of European stock. So, according to Islamic tradition and history, supposedly the Prophet Muhammad and Islam is supposed to be of the descendants of Ishmael. We all know that Ishmael, his mother was Hagar the Egyptian, and that his mother got him a wife out of Egypt. So that would make the Ishmaelites basically 3/4 Egyptian, black Egyptian, and 1/4 Hebrew. And they also intermixed with the sons of Keturah. It's just in the book of Jubilees, and so they would have been dark-skinned black people back in the days, the Arabs. And so, but there was a famous 7th century Arab poet also lived during the time of Muhammad. His name was Fado ibn al-Abbas al-Lahabi, who was from the tribe of Quraysh, from his father's side of the family and his mother's side of the family. And Quraysh is the same tribe that the Prophet Muhammad is supposedly from. This guy, his mother was Amina, the daughter of Abbas, who was the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad. So his mother was the Prophet's cousin. His grandfather, Abi Lahab, of course, was the Prophet's Muhammad's uncle. So, but this is what this guy said from 600 AD. He said, I am the black-skinned one. I am well known. My complexion is black. I am from the noble house of the Arabs. Whoever crosses swords with me will cross swords with one who is noble and strong. So here you see an Arab that is a descendant, family member of the Prophet Muhammad during 600 AD, who's saying that his skin is black. So if his skin is black, Muhammad's skin must have also been black. But the Arabs won't tell you that Muhammad was a black man. And there's a lot of other things going on with the Islam, the religion being created. And we see that back in time, way back, that the Muslims persecuted the Jews in Arabia and Khyber, the Battle of Khyber, Khaybar, and they drove them out of Arabia, and they also battled and attacked the Jews that were living in Africa. So, but as we see, as we know from the original DVD Hebrew Negroes, that the Arab slave trade existed for over 1,000 years, about 1,400 years to be exact, and it still continues to this day. The blacks that are born into slavery or born into slavery, they eventually learn the religion of their slave masters, their Muslim slave masters, Islam, and some convert just to do better business in a land that's predominantly occupied by Muslims, and they also fear persecution and destruction of their businesses, and just basically a hard time. So many of the Hebrew Israelites converted to Islam. And as we see here, this one slide, you see the Muslim abuse of blacks. Now these are not necessarily black Muslims, but Caucasian, Ottoman, Turkish Muslims. The abuse of blacks is seen with from their old slave workers is relentless and brutal in many Arab countries. There's a movie called I Am Slave that's from 2010 that depicts the treatment that a lot of Africans are going through today from the continuing of the Arab slave trade. However, many blacks in America and Europe and even Africa are converting to Islam because they believe Christianity is the white man's religion or slave religion, not knowing that, again, for over 1,400 years, that actually the Arabs started doing this enslaving before the white man jumped on board, and they raped and abused blacks at this time, and these practices are still going on. But the Arab excuse for the extreme violence they commit against African immigrants is that the Africans break into their houses and they rape their women and steal their money and kill. And so if African women, if they don't obey, and these African women are badly beaten up by their slave masters or their employer. Some of these African women, they can't deal with it so much to the fact that they resort to suicide after being subjected to such barbaric acts in the hands of their master employees or bosses. And a lot of times they can't say anything because they don't have any help, nobody to save them. And you can see here the picture of the lady. She's badly bruised from getting beaten by her slave master. So here we see a Arab kid. He's black. He could pass for African American, maybe pass for Ethiopian. But archaeology and forensics in Arabia, unearthing Black Arabia, bolstering these theories was that the forensic evidence of physical anthropologists and archaeologists who had found that most of the ancient human remains were not much different than those across the sea in Africa. They actually did studies on Arabia in comparison to Africa, and this guy named G. Elliott Smith wrote that there is a considerable mass of evidence to show that there was a very close resemblance between the Proto-Egyptians and the Arabs before either became intermingled with the Armenians and Turkish racial elements. So basically what he's saying is that before the black Arabs intermixed with the Turkish Ottoman Turks from the north, and also the Ottoman Turks are also near Armenia. So before they mixed in with these groups of people and became lighter and their hair texture changed, that the Arabs closely resembled the Egyptians, and the Egyptians of the past we know also were black. Ishmaelites, the Ishmaelite Arabs were primarily of black Egyptian stock, and the sons of Keturah were also run along with the Ishmaelites, and they had children together, and they lived in Arabia and the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. So in Saudi Arabia, the heat can get up to 131 degrees Fahrenheit, and the UV index is usually moderate to severe at its maximum of 10 to 12, higher than actually Nigeria and a lot of the West African countries along the west coast, including Ghana and Cameroon. But the original Arabians were not white-skinned, they were black. And we see here the Saudi Arabians sitting here in this looks like auditorium. They are all white-skinned people. And they have the head coverings that they normally wear with their Islamic tradition. But here we see a black Saudi Arabian named Mahed Abdullah. And as you can see here, he's a black man. As you can see, his older picture, and then his younger picture, he's on the left with the T-shirt. And T-shirt says soccer on it. He was the most famous soccer football player of all time. He was a true Arab. As you can see, all the people in this picture have afros, just like Negroes. The black Arabs are the real Arabs, going back to their forefather, the black Hebrew named Abraham, and his wife / maidservant Hagar the Egyptian. So although the Arab of today, this is a quote, although the Arab of today is sharply differentiated from the Negro of Africa, yet there must have been a time when both were represented by a single ancestral stock, which would have been Abraham. In no other way can the prevalence of certain Negroid features be accounted for in the original natives of Arabia. It's by Henry Fields. So he's basically saying that there's no way that the Arabs can have evidence of Negroid features in them if it wouldn't be from them coming from a single ancestral stock. And we all know that Abraham was that stock, because Abraham was the father of Isaac and Jacob and the Jews, the Israelites, and he's also the father of Ishmael and the Ishmaelites, who were considered the Arabs, as well as the sons of Keturah, and these were also considered Arabs as well. And from this line came the Semites, we see today. And then we also know that Abraham's brother Lot had some children, which became the Moabites and the Ammonites. Another division of Shem, which is in modern day Jordan. Here you see another quote that says, the predominant complexion of the Arabs is dark brownish black, and that of non-Arabs, or modern day Turkish Arabs, is white. And this is from Ibn Mandur. He lived in 1300 AD. It's about 700 years ago, around the time that the Ottoman Empire was just starting out. So Abraham, again, was the ancestor of stock. From him came the Israelites, the Ishmaelites, and the sons of Keturah. These are all Semites, and they were all people of color with dark brown skin, black skin. So we would expect also the Hebrews to be black as well. So here we have a picture of Al-Jahiz from 860 AD. Now there's two pictures that's been rendered of him. One is a picture of a black guy. One is a picture of a white Ottoman Turkish-looking guy, Arab. And Al-Jahiz was a 9th century Iraqi Arab who had his own ideas on why there was a difference between the peoples of Arabia and those to the north and the east. And so he wrote that all the people settled in the Hira, Arabia, besides the Banu Sulaim, these are black, like the tribe of Banu Salim, who live in the lava lands of North Arabia and are rendered black skinned like their environment. Jahiz also noted by saying that though they took their wives from the Byzantines, which is the Roman area, Turkish area, but through generations their original color usually was seen again in their children. So no sooner that they reproduced for 3 generations in the land of Arabia, at the lava lands, the heat of the lava lands of Arabia, North Arabia, turned them all back into the color of the Banu Sulaim. So he's basically saying that the people of Arabia, North Arabia, were black skinned like their environment, and even though that they had took some wives from Turkey that were probably more fair of skin, that the skin color still stayed the same through the generations. The black genes still came out in their seed. It also says that the Zanj, primarily of the coast, which is the east, and to the area's inhabitants who were Bantu-speaking people, say that God did not make them black in order to disfigure them. Rather, it is their environment that made them so. And these tribes take slaves from among the Ashban to mind their flocks and for irrigation work, manual labor, and domestic violence. And their wives from among the Byzantines, yet it takes less than 3 generations for the Hira, Arabia, to get them all the complexion of the Banu Salihim. So this 9th century Arab named Jahiz unveiled the truth. And from Jahiz, in fact, we learned that in many places these Arabs had settled by his time in Central Asia and other places, they had come to look much like the native people. He notes that the people of Central Asia cannot be distinguished from the people with fair red skins and chestnut mustaches. He said this was certainly the case in parts of Syria, Spain, and Central Asia, and mainly due to the Arabs taking many non-Arab concubines or wives. A large portion of the Middle East, in fact, simply converted their speech to Arabic, just as previously they had been converted to Aramaic, another language apparently of Arabian Nabatean origin. Jahiz, though wrongly attributes these differences in appearance to the environment rather than the fact that the children of the new Arab settlers, the Turkish settlers, had descended from non-Arab women of each region. A lot of the Ottoman Turkish men during the Ottomans' empire and rulership, they also took European women from Turkey and parts of Europe. They desired the white woman more than the black woman. Even some of the black Arabs, they also took slaves of white women during the time of their conquest. And you can see a lot of ancient pictures of the Moors and the black Arabs with concubines of white women. And because of this, the land of Arabia and the Middle East and the Arabs eventually started to get a little lighter, but you still see a remnant of the original black Arabs in Arabia and the Middle East today. So again, today much of the populations of Arabia is the product of many diverse groups of people who were originally from outside of the peninsula, from the north, who settled the peninsula during various invasions. Like I tell a lot of Arabs from Iraq and Iran, or from Palestine or Egypt or Lebanon, Jordan, I usually tell them that their people are descendants of Europeans and Ottoman Turks, and therefore they are of the seed of Japhet, and therefore are Gentiles, just as Jesus, Yeshua, had commented on Luke 21:24. The original Arabs, they were black, and some of them know this, some of them don't know this, some of them reject this, even when you told them all the proof. So these Arabs' descendants consider themselves Arabs, as do other people of regions mixed with the early Arab conquerors. But colonialists appear to have been aware that the indigenous or at least modified Arabians were in fact close to Africans in appearance. So some people really knew the truth, and they had actually talked about it. So the sons of Keturah and Ishmaelites are the real black Arabs. We went through this, but there's even more proof. Now, in the 19th century, an Orientalist named John Baldwin recognized the dark-skinned Yemenites as the original inhabitants of Arabia. He wrote the following: to the Cushite race belongs the oldest and purest Arabian blood, and also that great and very ancient civilization whose ruins abound in almost every district of the country. The South Arabs represent a residue of Hamitic populations which at one time occupied the whole of Arabia. If you remember, if you look at ancient maps, you will see that the Kush Empire started off in Africa, and his kingdom, or Nimrod's kingdom, which is son of Cush, extended all the way into Arabia and the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, and Assyria. And the sons of Keturah, you have different names, where you get the Midianites and Medan and Sheba, and these are all words associated with Cush. And so the Cushites also, over time, they intermingled their seed with the Arabs, the Ishmaelites, and the sons of Keturah. Keturah was believed to be an Ethiopian or Cushite stock, and for this reason, they also saw some Cushite features in the Arabs, the black Arabs. The Book of Jubilees in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, Hebrew/Ethiopic, in chapter 20, verses 11 to 12, it says that, and Ishmael and his sons and the sons of Keturah and their sons went together and dwelt from Paran, which is the Sinai Peninsula next to Egypt, to the entering of Babylon in all the land which was towards the east, facing the desert, the Arabian desert. And these mingled with each other, and their name was called Arabs and Ishmaelites. So according to this, you would assume to think that the sons of Keturah were the Arabs. The Ishmaelites were a separate set of people, even though the Ishmaelites did in fact mingle with the sons of Keturah. So this Arabic seed would be a mixture of both, in addition to mixing with the Cush people. Here we see pictures of Arab men. One at the bottom looks like an African American. The other one has a typical Arabic look to him, but he also has dark skin. So concerning the words of Al-Fadl ibn al-Abbas, and we talked about him earlier, of the 13th century, he says in this well-known Arabic lexicon that talking about himself, he says, "I am pure because the color of Arabs is dark." And this guy Ibn Mandur further states that it is said that he, or al-Fadl, meant that he is from the purest of the Arabs because most Arabs are black skinned. Ibn Bari, well-known Arab grammarian of the 12th century AD, explains al-Fadl ibn al-Abbas's words by saying that he means by this that his genealogy is pure and that he is a pure Arab because the Arabs describe their color as black, and they describe the color of the non-Arab Persians as red. Now, the Persians were not Arabic because they didn't come from Ishmael or the sons of Keturah. The Persians were actually descendants of Shem or Farksad and also Madai, and they also had a little bit of Cush mixed in with them at some point. And from the ancient Persians, you will see the dark-skinned Dravidian Indians, or the Indians we see in East Asia, and they also mixed in their bloodline with Elam. Elam was one of the sons of Shem, so they had Semitic blood, they had Japhetic blood, and they have Hamitic Cushite blood. This could be the reason why the Indians have dark skin. Might have a little different tone in their skin, but they also have straight hair, or hair that's not as quite that of a Negro in terms of the kinkiness. So Ibn Mandur further describes the pure Arabs by saying that lank hair, meaning like straight hair, is the kind of hair that most non-Arab Persians have, and Romans, while kinky hair is the kind of hair that most Arabs have. So here, this guy, Ibn Mandur, from about 1200 AD, is saying that the Romans and the non-Arab Persians, which would have been your Dravidian Indians, maybe Elamites, these people had kind of like straight hair, good grain of hair by European standards, and that the original Arabs had kinky hair, just like a Negro. If the original Arabs are associated with Shem or Abraham, then this would also mean that Abraham's son Isaac and Jacob and the Israelites will also have been black skinned with kinky hair. But it gets even better. We have more proof. So there was a book that a guy wrote. He was Italian. His name was Ludovico di Varthema, and he was a traveler, a diarist, aristocrat. He's known for traveling all throughout Africa and the Middle East, and he's also the first non-Muslim European to enter into Mecca and Medina, which was in Arabia, along the Dead Sea, as a pilgrim. And nearly everything that is known about his life comes from his own travel accounts, his itinerary, which he eventually published, or was published in Rome in 1510. And he describes in one of his books about a mountain in the Hijaz Mountains, which we showed a map of earlier in Arabia, of a group of people that were Jews. And so this segment of the book reads a chapter concerning a mountain inhabited by the Jews. And it says, at the end of 8 days, we found a mountain which appeared to be 10 or 12 miles in circumference, in which mountain there dwell 4,000 to 5,000 Jews. That's a lot of people who go naked and are in height of 5 or 6 spans. This is not that tall, because back in those days, man wasn't that tall. And have feminine voice, and underline it says, and are more black than any other color. So the Jews that these people found in the mountains of Hijaz in Arabia were more black than any other color, and it's about 4,000 to 5,000 of them. And they said that they lived entirely on the flesh of sheep and eat nothing else. They are circumcised, which is what the Jews do, and they confessed that they were Jews, and if they could get their hand on a Muslim or more into their hands, they would skin him alive. At the foot of the said mountain, they said that they found a tank of water, which was water that falls in the rainy season from the sky. And they loaded it with the said water onto 16,000 camels. There's a lot of camels too. Whereat the Jews were ill pleased, and they went about the mountains like wild goats, and on no account they descended into the plain, because they were mortal enemies of the Muslims. Now, Mr. Ludovico explains that these mountains that he was in were in the Hijaz Mountains of Arabia, and that they were more black than any other color. Like I said earlier, they also admitted in ancient history to a battle between the Muslims and the Jews called the Battle of Khaybar in 600 AD, around the time the Islam just started. And the Jews that were living in this area of Arabia were living peacefully. They had been there before Islam was even created, but when Islam was created and the Muslims arrived on the scene, the Muslims started trying to take over land. And when they encountered the Jews of Khaybar in Arabia, they defeated them, just as the curses of Israel states, which that the high gates of the Israelites would come down during the siege, during the battle, and that they would not be victorious over their enemies. And this is proof that furthermore proof that the Hebrew Israelites were black-skinned people. Here we see here a map of the Hijaz Mountains of West Arabia, near Mecca and Medina. And over there you see another picture. So to the south of the Hijaz Mountains, originally Hijaz, because there was no J, it was just H-I-Y-A-Z, was the Yemen of the Himyarites, whose descendants, according to the colonists, had traditions of an African origin. Bertram Thomas, on the modern remnants of the ancient cotton tribes, said that these tribes, with the exception of the Harassis, have a tradition of African origin, their order of their local antiquity being Sahakra and Bahara and Mahar and Kara. And this is in the book, The Southeastern Borderlands of Rub al-Khali, Bertram Thomas, volume 73, number 13, March 1929. Okay, so this is something interesting that I want to touch on, that I'll be going into depth later in the volume series. This talks about the black Kenites, and the Kenites are real particular and intriguing people. And in my book, Hebrews and Negroes, it's on my website and also on Amazon, I talked about the Kenites and were they really the descendants of Cain, because the Kenites also intermixed themselves with the children of Israel, and also along into the temple with the Levites. And the Kenites were also supposedly a branch of the Midianites, as Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, was supposedly a Kenite. And Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, supposedly was with the children of Israel when they were in the land of Canaan, and went up into Jericho, and then fell back and fought down into South Israel near Arad, or where the old Tel Arad temple site that they have found is that near the land that Edom once was near or occupied. And so the Kenites, if they were the descendants of Cain, it says that in Genesis that Cain was abolished or banished to the east from the Garden of Eden. So when he was banished from the Garden of Eden, that he had to go, or near the Garden of Eden, he had to go to the land of Nod, which was east. And this is in the book of Genesis. And if the Garden of Eden was in Ethiopia or near the Nile River, then east would have meant towards the Sinai Peninsula or to Arabia, in that area where the Edomites also dwelled. And we know that the land of two rivers that was given to Abraham, it also talks about how the Kenites were in this area as well as the Edomites or the Kenizzites. And in the Bible, it also talks about the Amalekites, or Amalek, the children of Amalek, so the Amalekites. And these people all were in the same area, in this area where Edom was at, and a lot of fighting going on. But it's interesting because some of the Arab tribes also connect themselves with the ancient Kenites, and they have interesting trades where they only work with metal. They're miners and metal workers and forged metals and stuff like that, and these were some of the characteristics of the children of Cain. So in the time of Pliny the Younger, 62, well, he lived from 62 to 112 AD. In the time of Flavius Josephus, he lived from 37 to 100 AD. The Solium or Solimian of Arabia were considered affiliated with the Kenites, who have been supposedly identified as the Baal Cain or Qyn, Qyn in Hebrew, all supposedly meaning the Kenites. They were miners and smiths of the Qudiyya Himyarites. This was a Arab tribe in Arabia. And so this guy named Moshe Gil wrote that the Targum calls the Kenites sons of Jethro, Salameans. And the sons of Sama, Moses' father-in-law, went up from the city of Jericho together with the sons of Judah to the wilderness of Judah, which is south of Arad. And Sama is included in the list of the sons of Judah in First Chronicles as the father of Bethlehem, and perhaps also the father of the Kenites, who are mentioned further in those lists, much like the Christian sources mentioned above. And it talks about the Kenites and Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, in the valley of the palm trees, Jericho. It talks about this in Judges. And according to Moshe Gil, the Targum was viewed as Jethro's tribes as Arabs. And if they were Jethro's tribes or Arabs of Jethro's tribes, there were also would have been Kenites, because supposedly Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, was a Kenite. And if you look at Judges 1:16, it talks about the children of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up out of the city of palm trees with the children of Judah into the wilderness of Judah, which lieth in the south of Arad, and they went and dwelt among the people. And so they're talking about how the Kenites were with the children of Judah. They dwelt among the children of Judah in Arad, or near the area of south of Arad. And we all know that if you look at the map about Tel Arad, the city that they say is the real city of David, or the city where the real temple of Jerusalem was laid to waste at, but it's not. You will see that this is South Israel, near Idumea, where Edom lived at, and the Kenizzites lived at, and the Amalekites lived at as well in ancient times. But we're going to dive deep into that later, because it's very interesting, the connections of this, as well as who is Edom today and who has Edom's bloodline, who is it connected with today in modern day times. Because it's, like I said earlier in the slides, that Edom is like a chameleon. He likes to blend himself in with the many nations of the world. Here is an interesting slide. It shows the people called the Adakazak of Mali. A lot of these names are really hard to pronounce. And Adakazak means sons of Isaac. Supposedly, they are descendants of the Hebrews that were once of the Songhai Empire in that Western African area, and especially in Mali. As you can see here on the map, there's one part of Mali, like the southeastern area of Mali, right there at the corner. You see where these people lived at, and their official language is Tadaksahak, and many are nomads and have few possessions apart from their animals. These people are nomads, and it may range in populations into Algeria and Niger. The men are often bilingual, speaking their own language and the language of the Tuareg black Berbers, who supposedly are the original people of Libya. Many saying that their language goes back to the Puttite pharaohs of Egypt, such as Eoput. He was a Libyan pharaoh of Egypt. The women and children are often isolated in their camps and speak only their language. It's very interesting. And as we know earlier in the original Hebrews and Negroes DVD, that the original Berbers, the black Berbers, are descendants of Put or Ham's son, and they were all black people. Eventually, through time, these black Berbers converted to Islam. In the beginning, there was no Islam, so they still were Berbers, but they had a different religion. Many of them practiced Judaism. And they call them now the Tuareg people, and their language is the Tamashk, dated way back into BC times. Their alphabet, known as the Tifinagh, appeared during the first millennium BC, which is older than Arabic. This language that they use, the use has shrunk since the invasion of North Africa by the white-skinned Romans, the Greeks, the French, the British, the Germanic peoples, and Turkish Arabs, but is still preserved with the Tuareg people. They are sometimes called the Blue Men because of the blue cloth veil they wear on their heads. The Romans talked about these blacks way back in the day. The European concubines from the Barbary slave trade that they took, as well as the Ottoman Turks, that was a common practice, also whitened the majority population that we see in North Africa, in addition to invasion from Ottoman Turks. And this is what you see today. But nevertheless, they are Muslim. Like I said at one point, they were not Muslims, but they still are known to be in these areas, even though the predominantly people of the land are light-skinned, Caucasian-looking Arab Muslims. Many of these people practiced Judaism before and eventually converted to Islam, which is falls in line with Deuteronomy 28:36, the curses of Israel. Some of the books that talk about what we just discussed, Sultan Bello in his Geographical Memoir or Survey of Africa, the Narratives and Travels and Discoveries of Northern and Central Africa in the years 1822-1823, Journal of a Second Expedition into the Interior of Africa from the Bight of Benin to Sokoto, 1829, and also The Crisis, which is in April 1957, founded by W.E. Du Bois as the official publication of the NAACP in regards to the Empire of Ghana and the crisis. And so moving along the line, along the curses of Israel, we see in Deuteronomy 28:37, and now shall become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations whither the Lord shall lead thee. The byword definition is a word or phrase associated with some person or thing. So instead of calling us Hebrew Israelites, throughout the years, we were labeled in America African Americans, blacks, darky, coon, on Jemima, nigger, colored, monkey boy. A lot of people in the South Carolina still will say, "Hey boy," little kids or grown men. The white people call you boy. Jigaboo, K-Fair, Porch Monkey, Pickaninny, Sambo, Spook, Tar Baby, Mammy, and Gollywog. In the Middle East, the Arabs refer to blacks as Abid or Abid, meaning slave stock. In India, Pakistan, the black people or dark-skinned people are nicknamed cities or the untouchables. Mexico's Morenos. In China, other places they have different nicknames for black people. These are all bywords not describing who we really are. Our last names have been also given to us by our enslavers.